A supervising army. To watch over the regular army, huh? Wait, do they even have a regular army left at this point? Not really. Okay, so what will this supervising army do? Shoot their own people who don't toe the line. Lovely. October 15th, 1950. Last week, the South Korean forces began crossing the 38th parallel into North Korea in force. This week, the Americans do the same. I'm Indy Neidell, and this is the Korean War. Last week came a UN resolution about what to do in Korea to restore things there. The resolution assumed that the war was nearly over, and South Korean forces crossed the 38th parallel in force last week into North Korea, pursuing the scattered remnants of the KPA, the North Korean army. The North Koreans had not expected the Americans to get involved in this conflict when it began back in June, and they also have not expected a UN offensive across the 38th parallel. Their armies have not really been reconstructed, and the defense posts on the parallel that were well prepared and fortified are not really being defended. By mid-October, formal resistance has almost dissolved. Sure, there are pockets of tough resistance left, but there's no longer a real front by today. And what's left of the Korean army, the North Korean army, is on the run to the Yalu River. I went over last week UN Forces Commander Douglas MacArthur's plan to hit the North Korean port of Wonsan with an amphibious attack by 10th Corps. Starting yesterday, the 14th, U.S. 7th Infantry Division from 10th Corps loads onto ships at Busan. And now, ladies and gentlemen, a few words about mines. In any military service, as in any other human institution, there are high-profile elements and poor relations. In the United States Navy, during the post-World War II years, emphasis was placed very much on the aircraft carrier and what it could do, until Incheon amphibious forces, for example, received little attention. But the poorest relation of all was the mine force. No one really likes mines. Since their first use in the mid-19th century, when they were called torpedoes, when Admiral Farragut at Mobile Bay shouted, "Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead," he was really damning mines. They have always been a weapon of the inferior naval power. I did not know that about torpedoes. Did you guys know that about torpedoes?
I did not.
Did you know that?
No idea.
Yeah, it's kind of cool, isn't it?
It's pretty cool.
Okay. Anyhow, they are basically a passive weapon. They just lie there, secretly, waiting to blow the bottom out of honest, unsuspecting ships. So they are generally regarded with something close to loathing by most sailors. Another reason for mine warfare's poor status is that the work is done by small vessels commanded by relatively junior officers. Few commanders get promoted to admiral in the mine business, and of course it is admirals who make policy decisions about navies and naval construction. The United States, in 1950, has almost totally dismantled its mine warfare operations. In the Pacific in World War II, they had 550 minesweepers. When this war began in July, they had exactly one operational sweeper available for Korea and 6 wooden-hulled auxiliary ships. There were also a few others scattered around the Pacific vastness, removing leftover mines from World War II. But you know who's really good at mine warfare? The Soviets, and by extension, the North Koreans. And this becomes apparent this week when the Navy sends those little ships to clear the approaches to Wonsan Harbor. The sweepers arrived the 10th, and the landing is set for next week on the 20th, but that may have to change, for the communists have mined over 1,000 square kilometers with over 3,000 mines, both magnetic and contact varieties. The sweepers are in trouble. Oh sure, aerial bombing strikes and underwater demolitions are ordered, but the main mine clearing is done the old-fashioned way, with paravanes and cables. This is both tedious and dangerous. On the 12th, a mine blows up under a sweeper, and it capsizes in 4 minutes. 3 more sweepers are soon lost, and casualties are in the hundreds. There is nothing like a safe channel through the minefield by the end of this week. And on October 10th, the ROK 1st Corps captures the port of Wonsan. Yep, the same day the minesweepers start work, the ROK have already walked north from the parallel and taken the city and the port. They continue north, and they've covered another 60 or so kilometers by the end of the week. Once the thin North Korean crust was cracked, there was not much resistance left. The communists mined the roads and did their best to demolish what the Air Force had not already destroyed for them. They blocked the advance where they could, often with single artillery pieces or machine gun nests. But by October 15th, UN troops were less than 30 miles from Pyongyang, and its fall was assured. The war did look as if it was indeed all but over. The advances in the north continue all week. In the Iron Triangle, the ROK 8th Division takes Chorwan the 10th. The next few days, elements of 3 ROK divisions reach Pyongyang, not Pyongyang, Pyongyang. As for those ROK 1st Corps forces that hit Wonsan, the ROK Capital and 3rd Divisions reach the southern area the 9th, and both enter at the 10th, though the 3rd does more of the actual fighting. On the 11th, the 3rd has fought through town and is heading north, while the Capital Division clears the city and occupies the airfield. Walton Walker flies in that day. It's the 3rd Division that remains in the general area, though, as the Capital Division continues to head north towards Hamhung and its port, Hungnam. As for 8th Army, U.S. 1st Cavalry Division begins fighting its way across the parallel the 9th, from around Kaesong. Kumchon, and just north of it, where the Yesong River crosses the Pyongyang Road, are the targets. They do actually meet a fair amount of resistance the first few days of the week, and the advance is pretty slow for the 3 cavalry regiments, along with the Commonwealth Brigade and the ROK 1st Division. The 13th is the main day, as it turns out, for eliminating the Kumchon pocket. Kumchon falls the 14th, and at the end of that day, U.S. 1st Corps has broken through the main KPA prepared positions between the 38th parallel and Pyongyang. And enemy front lines here don't really exist anymore. When it dragged its bleeding forces hastily back across the parallel, the communist world had apparently been ready to accept a temporary defeat. It was communist doctrine to exploit success, but it was also considered folly to support failure. The move in Korea had failed. Now they would drop it, wait till a better day. Well, that is not what's been happening. On the 14th, North Korean leader Kim Il-sung makes a broadcast to his forces after the collapse at Kumchon. He says, the state of disaster in which they find themselves is because the government did not expect the enemy to advance north across the parallel, which has thrown his officers into such turmoil that many have even thrown away their weapons. It's not often you actually ever hear dictators in any way take responsibility for things going badly. Kim does say, though, that they will resist to the bitter end. Any traitors they find, or anyone stirring the pot the wrong way, will be shot, regardless of rank, and to sort that out, a new supervising army of politically reliable army veterans is going to be formed, sort of like the Soviet commissars in World War II. As for China, who we've seen lurking in the background the past couple of months, on the 10th, Peking Radio broadcast Chinese intentions pretty much exactly as Zhou Enlai declared them last week, that if only South Korean troops cross the 38th parallel, they'll take no action, but will send in troops to assist the North if American or other non-Korean UN forces do. On the 14th, American Major General Charles Willoughby, an intelligence officer in Far East Command, FECOM, issues his study about the possibility of Chinese or Soviet intervention in Korea. He does not think the Soviets will intervene, but the Chinese question is trickier. He estimates the Chinese have 24 divisions along the Chinese-Korean border, and these are part of 38 total divisions in 9 armies in Manchuria. This is fairly accurate. Willoughby sums up the situation in Korea. The UN forces stood very close to total victory. The Inmin-gun had deteriorated into remnants. The ROKs had seized the important port of Wonsan on the east coast, and in FECOM there was a definite feeling that the moment for fruitful Chinese intervention had passed. Most of the vital area of North Korea had been overrun. Since Willoughby reasons the North Koreans have openly failed to rebuild their forces, this would indicate that the Soviets and Chinese are not going to invest in a losing cause. His views reflect those of MacArthur's, which I'll get to in a minute. Here is a very interesting passage from Willoughby's study. Recent declarations by CCF leaders threatening to enter North Korea if American forces were to cross the 38th parallel are probably in a category of diplomatic blackmail. The decision, if any, is beyond the purview of collective intelligence. It is a decision for war on the highest level. As I said a couple weeks ago, FECOM is a collective agency, not an evaluative one, as Willoughby writes here, even saying analysis of this is beyond his purview. But Washington does not contest his thoughts and conclusions. So if Washington is allowing FECOM to both collect intel and make international policy decisions based on it, then should anything negative happen, it really is Washington's fault. It was true that Washington had no pipeline into the Kremlin. It was true that the CIA had become woefully spotty in East Asia since the communist takeover. It was true that the picture of both Peking and Moscow remained vague, distorted, and open to arguments in Western capitals. Nevertheless, the responsibility to evaluate intelligence touching the highest political levels remained in Washington. Yet Washington kept relaying information to Tokyo, and Tokyo very early had made up its mind, as expressed by MacArthur. The Chinese would not dare to intervene. Washington is having soldiers make decisions that are beyond the scope of the military, and there may soon be serious consequences. There is a very high-level American command meeting that happens this week, actually. On the 15th, the heavy hitters of Team America meet up on Wake Island. President Harry Truman has flown all the way out here. Douglas MacArthur is there. Omar Bradley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he's there. Dean Rusk is there from the State Department. They are there not to talk about the fighting in Korea. You see, they take for granted that the war is nearly over, and their main concern is the rehabilitation of a unified Korean peninsula, much of which has been destroyed the past 3.5 months, if that wasn't already clear to you. The South more by the active war in the field, and the North by the relentless aerial bombing campaign. MacArthur thinks things will really be over by Thanksgiving, and 8th Army can be back in Japan by Christmas. Bradley is wondering when MacArthur can release a division to send over to Europe. There is something else they get around to discussing as well, though. Truman asks about the chances of the Soviets intervening in Korea, and MacArthur says they're pretty small. He says if they had intervened the first couple months, it would have been decisive, but he's not worried about them doing so now at all. Truman wonders about the communist Chinese then. MacArthur says military intelligence has the Chinese with 300,000 men in Manchuria, but not more than 200,000 on the Yalu River. But importantly, only around 60,000 of these could really be brought across into Korea. Also, the Chinese have no air force, so if they do get involved, they'll be slaughtered from above while marching all the way down to Pyongyang. No one disagrees with this assessment. MacArthur was operating on purely military assumptions that the Chinese did not have the ability to intervene. And one of these assumptions was that, if the Chinese dared oppose the righteous march of UN forces, the United States would retaliate with all its righteous wrath and fury, that American air would strike at China, interdict its long and painfully vulnerable supply lines across Manchuria, destroy the fledgling industry of which the Chinese were so proud. He firmly believed such a fear would deter the Chinese from action. He firmly believed also that upon a Chinese move, America would cry havoc and loose the dogs of war. China, even with its millions, could not hope to gain by general war with the West. These things he believed, but did not mention. How, you may ask, does China actually feel about the prospect of war with the U.S.? Well, Communist Chinese leader Mao Zedong, as we've seen, has already decided to send hundreds of thousands of troops into Korea. It certainly can't have been an easy decision to make, but make it he did, although, as David Halberstam writes, the fateful decision was always clear. China had to enter the war. Taiwan was crucial in all his reckoning. To Mao and others in the Chinese leadership, Taiwan was part of China. Now MacArthur was referring to it as an unsinkable aircraft carrier, which made it de facto American property. To Mao, that meant that a legitimate part of Chinese territory was seen by his sworn enemy as a weapon aimed at his country. For him, that meant the last battle of the Chinese Civil War had not yet been fought, something few Americans in power understood. But he knows his forces are not capable of an amphibious assault against Taiwan, well defended on land, protected at sea by the might of the 7th Fleet. He has neither the air nor sea power to pull that off. Korea, on the other hand, is a lot more attractive for confrontation. Any Americans in North Korea will be strung out and fairly vulnerable because of terrain and weather. And China has a huge advantage in manpower. The Chinese Politburo thinks that with China still pretty divided, since the Civil War ended only last year, and exhausted, and with a wrecked economy after so many years of war, that this is exactly the wrong time to have another war. And of course, this is what Washington also thinks, because that's how they would think if they were China. But Mao dominates the Politburo in all ways, and Mao wants to enter the Korean War. I will have much more to say about Mao and China in the near future, for this week of the war is over. A week that sees the UN forces gobbling up North Korean territory, the ROK taking Wonsan, even as a huge amphibious mission begins to take Wonsan, meetings and reports that say China will not enter the war, and Mao determined to enter the war. Funny thing about that Wake Island meeting, it is the first time Douglas MacArthur and Harry Truman have ever met face to face. Yep, MacArthur has been away from the States for many years. Despite what one may think from the various controversies of the past few months, there is no real animosity between the two. Or there is from MacArthur's side, depending on which of the variety of sources about the meeting you believe. The morning of the 15th, they get together for an hour, just the two of them, before the actual conference. The conference is like 90 minutes long, and there are no formal minutes recorded, just notes taken. In fact, by noon, MacArthur and Truman are already heading back to Tokyo and Washington. James Stokesbury writes that the conference was superficial, and its effect was to put a temporary and misleading patch over what actually were deep differences in personality and philosophy between Truman and MacArthur. But wait a second. Truman called for the meeting, and did so only on the 10th. Why? Why meet now so suddenly? And you want to know something? Between when just the two of them met and the official conference, there is actually another conference. In those 21 minutes, Truman and MacArthur meet with their advisors present. Well, what's all that about? There have been suggestions, which I will talk about next week. In fact, there is a bunch more to say about this meeting, and some myths that have arisen about it, and some things that are actually true. But I will get to that in the future, because you want to know something else? While these men are meeting on Wake Island, the military forces of Mao Zedong's Communist China are streaming in hordes across the Yalu River into North Korea.